forced us for me to be available on camera, and I'm very happy and proud to have our first guest be my friend and colleague, Dr. Ann Basting. And the first thing I notice is that Ann's COVID hair is a lot better than my COVID hair. You look fantastic. I look like an extra in the next Harry Potter film. So. But I want to introduce who Ann is, which is an amazing thing. Introducing who Ann is. Ann is a leader in our industry, a global leader in the idea of making really substantive change in the fields of aging and elder care. And she is the founder of an organization that I love and have loved forever called Time Slips. And Time Slips does this amazing thing in memory care by bringing arts, creativity, storytelling, theater into an environment where those things before Ann Basting did not happen, and has created amazing, amazing change in environments that need amazing change in them. She is also an amazing author, and one of the things we're going to talk about today is her brand new, fresh off the presses book called Creative Care. She is also the author of a few other novels. Novels is in your next life. A few other books, The Stages of Age, Forget Memory, and The Penelope Project, all of which are great books. And Ann is a fantastic writer. You need to buy these books, especially this one. And she is the founding director of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Center for Age and Community. And she's also an Ashoka Fellow and a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment, which I'm sure you all know unless you've been living under a rock. So I want to welcome Ann, and Ann, I want to start out by just having you talk a little bit about the book, introduce the book, and maybe read a passage for us to set us in where we are and what we're talking about today.
Well, let me back up a little bit and say what a wonderful and warm welcome, and very moving words coming from you, considering I think of you as a mentor and friend, and all I am a lot of it because of the trail you've blazed and the support you've given over the years. So it's all mutual. I feel really lucky to do this work. I feel I've been in academia and teaching for 25 years, and I teach at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Just moved over from the theater department to the English department. I have a new challenge. They have a PhD in creative writing and then a PhD in public rhetoric and community engagement. So 25 years into my career, I'm going to get a chance to teach graduate students, which will be great. I wrote most of those books, the first three, with an academic frame. And yet at the same time, over those 25 years, felt just an ocean of need in this field for this hopeful, positive, meaningful engagement that can happen with people with dementia. And then you just back up from there, because it's joyful for everyone, but it's powerful and accessible to people with cognitive challenges. And it does a lot of work to integrate them into their communities. So I think this book was an opportunity for me to tell the stories of the last 25 years, really emotionally and from my own family perspective for the first time as well, with my mother's diagnosis, and hope to get these stories out to a really broad audience that needs them so badly, from families to professionals. And so I structured the book in 3 sections. The story of how everybody always says, how did you get into this work? And so that's the first section, answering that question. The second one is, what's the core of it? What are the pieces of it? How do you do this communication, these techniques? So that second section is all chapters around each element of that. And those can improve people's personal relationships with anyone. It just happens to also really work in elder and dementia care. And then the third one is, what happens if you take these techniques and kind of pour them into our systems? And so for the last 10 years, my work's been projects doing just that. So I tell the stories of those projects. And then honestly, I didn't know how to end this book. And I ended it with a letter that I wrote my kids on the occasion of my mother's diagnosis. I didn't know if I could do that, knowing I would, because I read the audiobook, read it out loud, and then have it, it was very personal, but it felt right to do that. So that's the ending. And also I think visioning what's next with now we find ourselves in this really fascinating moment of COVID, but I think it's still all very applicable, the ways that the field still needs to evolve. So I'll read you the opening. You want to hear the opening?
I do.
So the first chapter is titled In Which Ruth Teaches Me What Joy Looks Like. It was opening day. Spirits were incredibly high. I had walked into Morgantown Care and Rehabilitation in Morgantown, Kentucky that Saturday morning to a chorus of exuberant greetings, not what you'd usually expect at a nursing home. Now it was just about 2 p.m., showtime. After 2 weeks of rehearsal and a year of planning, the elders, local actors, volunteers, and staff were about to perform their version of Peter Pan, one in which Wendy is in hospice care in her final phase of growing up. And the audience, rather than clapping to prove their belief in fairies, would meet the extended hand of an elder to prove that they believed in one another. There would be song and dance. There would be a giant crocodile, pirates, and of course, flying. These residents, several of whom had not been out of their rooms for months, were about to welcome an audience to see them and their nursing home in a completely new light. They were inviting the audience to see beauty and meaning in a place where most people see only overwhelming loss. Ruth had been at every rehearsal. If I had to guess, I would say Ruth was in her late 80s, with a bob of gray hair framing her face. Riding a wheelchair, she was one of a dozen elders dancing in the finale to Frank Sinatra singing "Fly Me to the Moon," as Shirley, a resident who had been the activity director in this very nursing home for 40 years, offered a blessing on the performance, and the stage manager called out, "Places." Ruth's care partner wheeled her out onto the home's front patio for the pre-show. The wind carried a chill, but every elder in the dance chorus insisted on going outside to greet the audience and listen to the live music. I looked around at the faces. Every one of them was wide-eyed and wonder-filled, except Ruth. She was crying. Her eyes were bright, but tears rolled down her cheeks. Her mouth was twisted into a half smile, half grimace. I went to her straight away, kneeling down in front of her and taking her hands. "Ruth," I whispered, "are you okay?" She nodded eagerly. "Are they happy tears?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said with a laugh. "Happy, happy tears." Happy tears. There's no better phrase to capture a feeling of joy in a time of tremendous challenge. such as when we create or experience poignant beauty in, say, a time of dementia, or a time of profound physical changes, or a time of powerfully missing people who have gone on before you, or who are too far away or too busy to visit. In my 25 years of bringing the arts to people in late life, almost no one believes me when I first suggest it is possible to feel joy in those moments, or that joy and meaning can coexist in some of the hardest times of our lives, if we are lucky enough to live that long. The power of being invited into creating meaning, of working together to create art that has a lasting legacy, is an elusive thing to describe. But when people feel it, they understand it deeply. I'm fairly confident that in the beginning of their training, the staff at the nursing home in Morgantown didn't believe in that power, nor did the elders or their families. But after the show, they sure believed in themselves, in one another, and in the power of the shared creative experience. I didn't always believe either. I didn't even know it was a thing to be believed in. My journey toward the performance of Wendy's Neverland in a nursing home in Morgantown was a long, slow discovery for me, a gradual accumulation of experiences rather than a lightning strike. I continue to learn every day, especially now, as the landscape of time shifts under my own feet, bringing changes to my own family. It is my hope that the stories I've gathered here, stories of how I learned to apply the insights from theater and creativity studies to the world of elder care and memory loss, stories of bringing joy and connection to those who thought these possibilities were gone, stories from my many encounters with elders and care partners, offer readers a similar journey toward discovery, a journey toward believing that beauty, growth, learning, and joy are all possible in moments that most people assume to be overwhelmed only by loss and sorrow. My hope is that by reading this book, you can follow in my footsteps and transform your relationships with people experiencing dementia and other changes that accompany aging. There you go.
It's fantastic.
A little taste.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love how you really blatantly talk about the concept of belief, and how you yourself didn't at first believe it, and how hard it is to walk into environments that are institutional in nature and set in their ways like feet in concrete. And that's how hard this work is. That's the beginning. It really informs what needs to be done, and how it really is a belief system. I really love that.
Well, I think it's true. I think we just have to constantly ask ourselves, what are we accepting here? What, when we're afraid of aging, or when we feel like we don't want to visit, or we don't know what to say to someone who's disabled or just old. What is it that we're accepting? And what are we accepting about our own aging process? How are we actually carving out what's going to happen to us by accepting now what's a given now? And how can we disrupt it?
Yeah.
I often, when I give talks, when I used to give keynotes, when that was a thing, I would start out by saying, when is it exactly everyone has picked as a date in their life they'd like to stop learning and growing? Because it's good just to note that, so that your care team knows that you don't want to learn and grow anymore. And everyone's like, what? I said, think about our systems, and that's the insinuation, is that doesn't matter anymore. People don't want to do that anymore. And it could not be farther from the truth.
Yeah. I want to talk about the book more in a minute. And I want to tell the audience that this wonderful tool on your screen called Zoom has this thing called Q&A at the bottom of it. So if you swipe your cursor across the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A section in there. So if you have questions for Anne at the end, we're going to ask a few audience questions. So we want this to be participatory for you and for us. And you mentioned that people ask how you got into this. Can you talk a little bit more about the origin story for you? I guess both kind of from the two pillars, from the idea of aging and the idea of the arts. What's the origin story?
Well, I feel like both of them, in some ways, were my saving graces in separate ways, and then they kind of came together. I tell the story of sort of mundane mean girlness in middle school, where I just found myself alone a lot and not, getting into the arts because I had the time and I loved to do it, right? And so my mom, when I didn't have too many friends in middle school, Mom put me in art classes with adults. I was 13, and I was painting and drawing and going on field trips with, people in their 40s and 50s and retirees, and it was kind of awesome. And so I became really comfortable around people older than me and making art with people. So I loved writing and I loved visual arts as a kid. And then simultaneously found myself sort of on this track of getting along with people older than me, adults, and much older than me, just sort of naturally. That did connect to my grandmother, with whom I had a good relationship, but I didn't see her all that often. It wasn't like I was raised by my grandmother or anything. But it did come down to a moment, and I tell this story in the book, about visiting my grandmother after she'd had a stroke in a nursing home, and she couldn't talk. She couldn't write, she couldn't read, and she had been just a very powerful storyteller in her life. And my mom said what killed her wasn't the stroke, it was not getting the last word. So
that's a great line.
yeah. She, when I visited her, with just a sound and a finger point and about 500 questions from me, I realized we told a story between us, but it was all about how I invited it out, that everyone has a way to communicate and a story to tell, but that the creativity has to come from the listener and the facilitator in some situations, of really inviting a story into being and listening and recognizing it, almost to the point of learning a language. You're learning a new language. So from there, it all just kind of snowballed, and discovering also at that time, people with dementia really were treated with reality orientation. Reminiscence was the big thing. And it's great. We have stories, we need to get them out. It's step number one. But when cognitive challenges come in and you're demonstrating your losses, or you can experience shame when you can't participate in that. One really valuable thing to know is that you just walk right around it to imagination and invite a story to come out in that way, and it's just like turning a light on in a room. It's just a dramatic difference from loss and shame or silence into laughter and singing and shaping stories together.
You mentioned the idea of inventing a new language, and one of the things that I love about your work is there's a language to your work that is so inspiring, because you use words that you never hear about what we do, about aging and getting older, and the loss of memory, and all of the other words that people use. Your words are joy and meaning and awe and wonder and beauty, and so how did you start to think along those lines? Because I know people who do some of that, but I've never known anybody who does it the way you do, where you just bombard this problem with positivity and beauty, and it just works. How did you do that?
I think another story I tell in the book is of walking into a locked Alzheimer's unit, and armed with all of these theater games that I was trying to see if it worked, because this was like 30 years ago, when the best advice for working with people with dementia was be flexible and good luck, right? And so I was trying to make these things work, and nothing worked week after week, and it was hard to go back to that place. It was a bleak nursing home situation, and you could easily, and I was every week overwhelmed by the losses, by the smells, by the losses, by just the devastating situation, by the fact that the people I was there to visit and work with almost never even lifted their chins to make eye contact. Like there was no human contact. And on the day that I switched and just said, you know what, let's not try memory anymore. We don't do so well with that. Let's make something up, and I will just echo anything you say, and we're going to make a story. And to have just a visual prompt, which at that point was a picture of a cowboy, the Marlboro Man, actually, from a magazine, and to have it launch into a 45-minute story filled with song and movement and laughter. And I mean, I think I was in shock. And that they were including me in their fun and welcoming me into their world. And I felt honored. And all I was doing was asking questions and repeating. I almost had no role in this whatsoever. So I think that you feel awe at human connection. And I was overwhelmed with gratitude at having figured this out, and a responsibility of setting it up in a way that other people could learn this and take it and have more people experience that joy. And also just recognizing that intense discrepancy between that setting, which so many people they would drive right by the building, not even go in, right? And that's the kind of setting that prompts everyone to say, I never, ever put me in a place like that. And yet the tremendous joy and laughter that came out of that hour, and the gift that came out of that story, I think since that moment, that was 1996, I've been sort of serving that moment to relate it to other people and to bring it out. And awe was the best. I was really thankful when I stumbled into the awe research, because I really feel like that captures it, all of it, the wonder, the joy, all of that inside of it. And also the negative side of awe, because awe is two-faced. It really is both at the same time. Awe is almost like a breathlessness at connecting to something vast, big, so much bigger than you. And it's part of meaning making, and a feeling of purpose and meaning, that you're comforted by this vastness in your place in the universe. And you can get that through creativity. And I think in the book, I make the argument that you can also get that through a connection with another human soul.
Yeah. You mentioned the idea of shame, and with people that are experiencing severe memory loss, and I think most family members and caregivers have the best of intentions, but the idea of correcting someone whose memory is not to be counted on, unintentionally creates a wall. And I love, this using theater games and improv just seems like this, it's one of those ideas that when I first heard about it, I just thought, that's an idea that's just been sitting there waiting for a genius like Ann Basting to pick up and use, because I just thought, of course. Can you talk about improv and how that works in the world that you've created here?
Sure. And then, of course, I'm going to deflect all credit to the many other people who are doing this with so many other audiences. People use improvisation, which is the core tenet is yes and. So, and there's a whole chapter in there called Yes and, where you basically observe everything happening around you. You become just very intensive observation, taking in visual, language cues, facial expression cues, every, sort of hidden meanings. You're reading everything in the moment. And the yes part is that you're accepting it. And then the and part is that your response is something positive back to it. So that is, people are using theater practitioners. Right now, there's sort of a, before COVID, and now everyone's saying yes and, because we have to respond to COVID with improvisation. There's no alternative. They're using it in business settings, educational settings. Medical schools are getting trained in it. Theater practitioners have been using it in community building with people, homeless people, anybody you're trying to build community with. It's an incredible tool. It also really works well with people with dementia who are in kind of an eternal present, because it is an experience of the present moment. Like a hyper alertness to the present moment. In that way, it becomes a really useful tool for caregivers of any kind, because it brings you into the present with the person you're in relationship with. That's I think the beauty of it. And when you can feel the alternative when you say yes, but, or no, when you correct someone, especially with dementia, the outcome is going to be a continued self-editing into silence for fear of or shame of saying the wrong thing. Yes and is the opposite, which is a continued opening and a trying to communicate and connect. So you can just see, you have this moment when if you say yes and, or if yes but sends you in this direction, and yes and sends you in that one.
And just the concept of memory, and how memory for these people is elusive. And I remember seeing you talk, what is now probably a really long time ago, in Washington, D.C., and you talked about the fact that, if grandma is in 1944 today, don't correct her and tell her you should be in 2005, meet her where she is. And that in and of itself is about connection, and not, no, grandma, you should remember this, because it makes her feel shamed.
Yeah. And really, what is it? You're in a situation of profound short-term memory loss. Any correction you make is gone in 30 seconds. It's not going to stick. Who is it making feel better?
Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, it always comes back.
It's a noble impulse. I always describe it as a noble impulse, because the caregivers or the family members want to repair the loss. And this is the metaphor I think you're referring to when I talk about, like, no, I couldn't be your mother because I was born in 1970 something, and I am your daughter, and this is our life together, and blah 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 blah. And you end up fact by fact building a wall of facts that just stands between you, and you can't reach each other through that wall. But if you walked around and said, I'm not your mother, but tell me about your mother. How did she make you feel? and you begin to communicate. You ask a beautiful question, which is another whole chapter in the book, and it invites a response that forges connection rather than correction. Oh, I've never said that before. I'm gonna say that again.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
You took the words out of my mouth with beautiful questions, because I wanted to. Beautiful questions is a chapter in the book and an important part of your work. Can you talk about that concept and what it means and how you use it?
Sure. I think people who've been around the field for a long time in communication or education, for a long time, I called them open-ended questions. And even that was radical, because in care situations, particularly with people with cognitive challenges, staff and family are often taught, just give one or two options. Don't overwhelm people with choices, because it's difficult to process those choices. And that's true. If you're asking someone what they want for dinner and you have a couple of choices, do you want this or do you want this? It's instrumental. You're going to get something done. But if you're trying to form relationship, if you're trying to enter a meaning-making process, open questions open up the possibilities for expression really broadly. So, in response to the prompt of the Marlboro Man, we would say, what do you want to call him? Where do you want to say he lives? What sounds do you hear? Those were all open-ended questions versus a closed question, is this a cowboy? That's certainly no fun to answer, because it has nothing to do with your own creativity. It's the other person's creativity. I started calling them beautiful questions because after years of this is consistently the hardest thing for people to learn. And I realized it was an art to ask these questions, to pause your own yearning to correct and your own emotional response to someone in that moment, and pause and ask a question that opens the moment to that person instead, is just it's an art. And so I call them beautiful questions, ones that open relationship, have no right or wrong answer. And to me, the publisher actually recommended that we call it beautiful questions, because it's such a core piece of all of the work. Yeah, I think that's really it. And I've learned from my own father, who's gotten really, really good at asking these questions. He told me a story about when my mom and he went out to dinner with some friends. She'd been diagnosed already with Alzheimer's, and it's still pretty early. But they had a wonderful evening. It was really special for both of them. And they got home, and Mom said, "Do you want me to set the table?" And Dad said his first response was, "How dare you forget? I worked so hard to set up that dinner. We had so much fun." And instead he said he stopped and he asked, "Are you hungry?" And she said, "No. We ate already, didn't we?" "Yep, we did. But you tell me if you're hungry." And he was mad at the disease, not her, and just learning that technique. I mean, he's so good at it now, and I don't know how good I am with her, because it's emotional to try to do it in your own family. But I've just been really inspired by how he's embedded it into his everyday life now.
It's fantastic. It's a great story. The one of the chapters of the book is around the idea of the possibility of scaling creative care, and I guess I kind of want to ask a more base of the pyramid question. Is it just seems like ageism is so alive and well, and I guess a part of this is, how do we get people to stop? how do we get them to just think aging can be cool and it's a natural part of our life, and how does that associate with the idea of scaling your amazing model, especially in these places where they can be terrible?
You know, it's a great question, and one you and I've toyed with, I think, for a while, of how to bring this out to such a level that it starts making a difference in public perception of the capacity and the power and the potential of late life. And then for me as an educator, how do you invite young people into a positive experience with people they're essentially kind of afraid of? You know, people with dementia, people with profound disabilities. How do you set up that encounter as one of a playful, joyful exchange, so that it sort of runs counter to the public narrative? And I've evolved in this thinking. I see like three prongs for this. One is that we bring these tools to families. Families are the ones that need it right now. You know, 5 million people with dementia, and in the United States alone, set to triple. We're going to need these tools in our own lives, for our own families and our own communities. And that Time Slips is doing through a new initiative called engagement parties, which I was really inspired by another Ashoka fellow, Lennon Flowers, who does dinner parties, which are really positive ways for young people to process grief together. This is a positive way for families to learn super simple engagement techniques that make their relationships positive with family members with dementia. So families.
I think actually Lennon is part of our audience right now. So
Is
hi,
she
Lennon.
Lennon. Thank you, Lennon. The inspiration for a positive framing and a title for family and friend engagement. So we're rolling that out actually in the fall. We've been demoing it and piloting it in collaboration with some good folks in Detroit. The second pier is, the pillar is the next generation, going upstream and giving these techniques to students through service learning models in high school and college. And that we have a whole next gen program through Time Slips. And I talk about that actually in the book. There's a chapter called the Student Artist in Residence Program, where they live in exchange for room and board. They live in care communities, doing intergenerational housing in exchange for kind of creative workshops built on this model of strength-based creative exchange. And then there's the organizational aging services level, where I talk about studying the systems and then kind of pouring the techniques into the system like water, so that it figures out where creative engagement can happen inside that system. And it builds, fostering those creative relationships builds the joy of the staff, as well as the exchange with the older adults they're serving. Excuse me.
You and I have talked about the idea of social prescribing and how that has become somewhat common in other countries. Can you talk about what that concept is, and if we have a prayer of getting it implemented here?
Let us all pray. You know, all this work that we're describing, it's positive, it builds on strengths, it connects people, it eases isolation, it fosters well-being, it promotes experiences of awe, which also research tells us promotes well-being. It fosters generativity, which promotes, and generosity, which all promotes well-being. It's all preventative work. It's all beneficial in the long run. Countries with national healthcare systems value prevention because they save money in the long run. You prevent some of
crazy
these
concept.
Oh my goodness.
That's insane.
I
don't know what you're
know.
talking about.
And so that's where other countries that have national health have really had a running head start on this social prescription. And there's some really great research out there now about the benefit of it. So essentially, it's also bringing back into relationship the arts and culture sector, which is over the last 100+ years become separated from the health and social services sectors. They seem to be operating on different parts of the human being, but really we need to bring them back together for wholeness and wellness. And both you can sort of feel them having moved a little bit closer to each other in the last, say, 10, 15 years. And right now is really ripe for this because boy, do we need arts and culture in this moment. You can feel it, meaningfulness in our lives and opportunities for meaning making. So like say in the UK, if you go see your general practitioner and he or she senses that you're a little maybe lonely, isolated, depressed, they can give you a social prescription to talk with a navigator, whatever word you want to use. And that person knows the arts and culture sector and can connect you with a program that'll work for you near you. So that person is the person who gets paid in that system to help connect you with that. And then also the arts and culture gets paid for the programming. Where that finds an equivalent in our bizarre jerry-rigged system is going to be fascinating, whether it comes from the insurance industry, which would make sense because they benefit from prevention, or private donors, or a combination thereof. There are the programs out there now. There's a demo in Western Massachusetts called Culture RX that is fascinating, and I'm eagerly following it. They got a little put on hiatus from COVID, but they're finding their way through it. So making it billable, finding a funding stream to support this work, that's going to be the way toward it in the future. And I think forming a collective impact group that's exploring how to make this happen will be the key.
So let's address the elephant in the room that we've been trapped in for almost 4 months now. How has COVID changed the way you think about your work? And are there lessons that we need to learn in this, I guess, both from an aging perspective and a human being perspective of what we've been through these last few months?
Great question. Oh my goodness. I think COVID has taught us that humans need each other or we go crazy. That we are incredibly inventive when we're facing obstacles like this, because the creativity pouring out of this moment is astonishing. How we're overcoming all these obstacles and barriers to reach each other. Like this one, like Zoom, or any of these other platforms. It's never going to replace human-to-human contact, which you can tell because if you've seen those pictures of elaborate pieces of plastic and the hug things where they're trying to figure out how we can hug each other through plastic. I'm like, yeah. Oh my God.
The hugging booth.
Exactly. And the plexiglass visitation booths, and just, to me, I've been really hopeful about long-term care in the discussion that's happening right now, which is, it's an acknowledgement that it's broken. Nobody wants it to be this way. That's really been revealed. Health disparities, we're realizing we're seeing it really, really plainly, and we can't live with that. We need to change that. We need to integrate meaning making, not just protecting the physical lives of people, because I think witnessing these people dying alone without their families, we're protecting them from what? At what cost? We're creating a second epidemic of isolation and loneliness, which is going to lead to a whole nother wave of death by despair.
So interesting, the language right now too, because you have on the one side social distancing and social connection, the idea on the one hand that you're protecting someone from getting physically sick by ensuring that they're going to be emotionally and mentally sick.
Yeah, truly. The other hopeful thing is families are getting really clear that they want to connect and figuring out how to do it. I think from the time slip side, I've just been in awe of the team because we've been a virtual nonprofit since 2011, 2013. And so we have all these virtual tools. We're like, oh my God, how do we tell people about them? Because that's what people need right now. All the training's online, all our tools are all downloadable. The Creativity Center is just sitting there waiting for people to use. So our effort has really been to figure out how to get the word out to folks as quickly as possible. And then also, part of the systems change and the sustainability work that I was describing in organizations for us is about creating long-term projects. So the example is, and there's a chapter in the book on this, the Kentucky project that I did recently and is finishing now, where I describe it in the opening section, 12 rural nursing homes across Kentucky, all reimagining the story of Peter Pan over 2 years. And it culminates. And so you have this accumulation of excitement and interest and skill and expression shaping into these immersive theater productions, which just were, by the time they appeared, everyone was just at this, this is so great. It's so fun. And those kind of long range projects are crucial right now because we've had time totally torn out of our lives. And that, I think, is part of the despair. So we don't know how long it's going to last. We don't know what time means anymore. What's a weekend? What's summer? What's a holiday?
It might be a weekend right now for all I know.
Who knows? Have I changed my clothes? I don't know. What time of day is it? I don't know. So reinstalling some of these, a sense of time through the scaffolding of projects and workshops that build over time, I think is really powerful. So on the Time Slips resource page, you'll see lots of creativity guides that can be used week by week. And Signature Healthcare, who was our partner on the Kentucky project, just launched the Super Summer, it's called, and they borrowed one of our creativity guides around the superhero project that we did.
That's fantastic.
And they every week for all of their nursing homes are all participating in the creativity challenge for that week, and it'll accumulate in a company-wide celebration of the creativity that came out of their care homes.
That's great change. Congratulations. That's huge.
Well, congratulations to them for, really taking it and running with it.
Yeah. So you and I are story addicts. We couldn't live without them. I think most humans are. I want to ask you to tell a story because I really like it. You won the MacArthur Genius Grant. You were awarded the MacArthur Genius Grant. And one of the mysterious, wonderful things about that most people probably know is that you don't know you're getting it ahead of time. So can you tell the story of what happened that day?
Yes. and then I'll add a little one that always keeps me humble. I'll add a little element to that. So I found myself giving 2 keynotes to try to raise some funds to pay for the student artist in residence program, because I didn't have any funding for it. And so I was exhausted. I had driven up to University of Wisconsin Sheboygan, given a talk, and then driven a couple of hours over to another campus to give a fall welcome talk to their staff. And I was driving home and a little worried that I'd drive myself off the road because I was so tired. And I got a call while I was driving, and I saw it was 312, but I thought I have to take a call because my kids, I'm on duty for the kids because my husband was coming back in town traveling. So I picked it up, and they said they were from the MacArthur Foundation. And I thought, my first thought was, somebody needs a recommendation for something. They said, are you in a place you can have a private conversation? And I said, I'm driving in a car by myself, if that's okay. And they said, we'd like you to pull over.
They've done this before.
They've done this before. And I said, I'm in construction, so it's going to be we're going to have to make some uncomfortable small talk for a few minutes. How are you? What's going, and so we chatted a little, and I said, okay, I'm pulled over. And they said, well, we'd like to tell you you're a MacArthur Fellow. And I just burst out in tears. I think it was just a long day. And I said, thank you so much for making me pull over. And then I heard laughter, and I didn't realize it was like a whole room full of people on the other line. So that was my day. And then right before the public announcement came out, we sat down to tell the kids. And my kids at the time were about 4 years younger now, so 11 and 14. And we said, well, I got this award. And my older son said, well, why did they give it to you? And I said, and my younger one goes, I know why. And I said, oh, really? Well, I'd like to know. And he said, you know how when we can't find something, Mom knows exactly where it is? That's why.
That's all it takes. You're a genius at finding things.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a great story.
Yeah.
Well, we're running out of time. So I want to say you're going to be presenting tomorrow at the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Summit online. And people can sign up for that by going to women'salzheimersmovement.org. And Anne is going to be joining Maria Shriver and Maria Shriver's organization and lots of other really amazing people to talk about Alzheimer's and women and the effect and what we need to do. And it should be a fantastic day. I will be gladly in attendance, so I want to make sure everybody knows about that and can get to it. We have been here to talk about this book, Creative Care. And can you tell us what is the best way for us to buy copies of this book?
You can. It's available at any of your preferred online platforms. There's of course, Amazon, and there's Bookshop, and all kinds of different ones. You can find it anywhere online. You can also, there's a reader's guide. I have a personal website, which is ann-basting.com, and you'll see a Creative Care tab, and there you'll see links to everywhere you can buy it. Reviews, testimonials, the reader's guide, all of that is there as well. And I'd add timeslips.org for all kinds of resources to continue this.
I second that emotion. We get engaged, spend a lot of time at timeslips.org. I'm also wanted to announce that we're going to buy a copy of Creative Care for all of our staff and
that's
get
great.
it to everybody, because we've had one of your trained facilitators do
Sarah.
some training for us, and Sarah is fantastic and
Yeah.
a wonderful teacher and a great friend. And so I want to thank you so much for doing this with us. Experience Talks Zoomcast entering into the 2020s with a bang, not a whimper.
It's just great to have some time to chat with you about this work that we've been doing in this field. It's great.
It's fun stuff. And for the audience, I want to also say we're going to be doing this Zoomcast monthly from now on. And in July, we're going to do a panel of expert African-American thought leaders and activists in Los Angeles about the Black Lives Matter movement. Some really, really smart, amazing, thoughtful people who hopefully can shine a light on this moment in time and what we're supposed to do about it. So I'm very, very excited about that show, and we'll send out information to everybody about the date and all of that stuff. So Anne, thank you again.
Thank you.
I miss you. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person sometime before.
Yes.
God only knows what.
Hopefully soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody in the audience for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.
All right. Bye everybody. Thank you.